Cancel her reservation. The sentence sliced through the marble lobby so sharply that even the rolling suitcase near the elevator seemed to stop moving. Rain tapped softly against the 40-foot glass windows of Lancaster Crown Hotel while every head in the lobby turned toward the woman standing at the front desk. Vanessa Cole didn't react right away. Water still clung to the shoulders of her charcoal grey coat from the storm outside, tiny droplets catching the chandelier light like scattered diamonds. Her fingers rested calmly on the black leather handle of her carry-on while the young receptionist slowly pushed her platinum credit card back across the counter with 2 fingers, like she didn't want to touch it longer than necessary. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "There seems to be an issue with your booking." Vanessa glanced down at the screen behind the desk. Her reservation was clearly visible. Presidential suite. 3 nights. Paid in full. She looked back up gently. "What kind of issue?" Before the receptionist could answer, a tall white man in a navy suit stepped forward from the management office nearby. Trevor Whitmore, General Manager. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he approached, every movement carrying the cold confidence of someone used to controlling expensive spaces. "The issue," Trevor said smoothly, "is that this suite is reserved for verified VIP guests." The air changed. Nearby guests stopped whispering. A businessman lowered his phone halfway from his ear. Even the piano music floating through the lobby suddenly felt too soft for the tension growing beneath the chandeliers. Vanessa studied Trevor quietly. He never looked at her reservation once. Never asked her name. His eyes moved instead over her damp coat, her natural curls, her simple sneakers still darkened from rainwater. He had already decided who she was before she spoke. "I am the guest," Vanessa replied calmly. Trevor smiled politely, but there was something sharp underneath it. "Lancaster Crown maintains a certain experience for our clientele. We can recommend another hotel about 6 blocks. Downtown." One of the bellmen near the entrance shifted uncomfortably. A young Latina concierge glanced down at her tablet, pretending not to hear. But several guests were watching openly now, curiosity flickering across their faces like candlelight. Vanessa slowly removed her passport from her purse and slid it across the desk. Trevor didn't even pick it up. "That won't be necessary." The receptionist gave a small nervous laugh. "People try this all the time." Vanessa finally tilted her head slightly. "Try what?" The receptionist hesitated before muttering, "Booking rooms they can't actually afford." A silence fell over the lobby so suddenly it almost hummed. Outside, thunder rolled across the Manhattan skyline while headlights smeared gold across the wet street beyond the windows. Vanessa looked around the lobby once. The towering floral arrangements. The polished brass rails. The enormous crystal chandelier she personally approved 5 years earlier during the hotel's redesign. Nobody recognized her. Not one person. Trevor folded his hands in front of him. "I'm going to ask security to escort you out now before this becomes uncomfortable." But Vanessa didn't move. She simply glanced upward toward the massive antique clock hanging above the reception desk. 8:52 p.m. Then she looked back at Trevor with a calmness that somehow unsettled him more than anger ever could. "How long have you worked here, Mr. Whitmore?" Trevor blinked once, caught off guard by the question. "Excuse me? I asked how long you've worked here." 7 years, he answered carefully. Vanessa nodded slowly as if confirming something to herself. Then, without another word, she walked across the lobby and sat down on one of the white velvet couches beneath the chandelier. Rainwater glimmered faintly beneath her shoes on the marble floor. Around her, whispers started spreading through the lobby like smoke. Trevor's jaw tightened. He warned. Vanessa calmly reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and sent a single email. Then she crossed her legs quietly and waited. The moment Vanessa lowered her phone onto the velvet cushion beside her, something invisible shifted inside the lobby. It was subtle at first. Almost impossible to notice unless you were paying attention. The concierge desk on the east side suddenly went silent when 3 employees checked their tablets at the exact same time. A bartender polishing wine glasses near the lounge froze mid-motion, eyes narrowing at a notification glowing across his screen. Trevor noticed it too. His confident posture tightened slightly as he glanced toward the front desk computers. One by one, tiny red warning icons began appearing across the reservation system. "What is going on?" the receptionist whispered under her breath. Vanessa remained still beneath the chandelier, hands folded neatly in her lap. The rain outside had softened now, leaving streaks of silver water crawling down the giant windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. Somewhere near the elevators, a nervous laugh broke the silence, but nobody joined in. Trevor straightened his tie and walked toward Vanessa with slower steps this time. "If this is some kind of stunt, I strongly suggest you stop now." Vanessa looked up at him calmly. "I already did." That answer unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He had spent years managing difficult celebrities, billionaire guests, politicians, and athletes. He knew how entitlement sounded, how manipulation looked. But this woman was different. She was too calm, too patient, like someone waiting for gravity to finish its work. Across the lobby, the young bellman from earlier, Ethan Brooks, quietly approached the reception desk. "Sir," he said carefully, keeping his voice low, "corporate just sent an emergency authentication request to every department." Trevor frowned immediately. "That is impossible." Ethan swallowed. "It says founder-level authorization." Trevor's expression hardened. "There has not been a founder review in over 4 years." Vanessa said nothing. The receptionist suddenly gasped softly as her monitor screen flickered once. Then again. "Ah? Mr. Whitmore." Trevor turned sharply. "What now?" "The executive access accounts are being locked." Trevor walked behind the desk himself and grabbed the keyboard. His fingers moved quickly, frustration growing with every failed login attempt. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. A cold pulse climbed slowly into his chest. Nearby guests had completely stopped pretending not to watch. Several phones were openly recording now. The pianist in the lounge stopped playing entirely after realizing nobody was listening anymore. All attention in the massive marble lobby had narrowed toward one woman sitting quietly beneath a crystal chandelier. Vanessa glanced once more toward the antique clock. 8:58 p.m. Trevor forced a smile that looked painfully strained around the edges. "Who exactly are you?" Vanessa met his eyes for the first time since sitting down. Someone who wanted to know whether this hotel still deserved its name. Before Trevor could answer, every screen behind the reception desk suddenly went black at once. The entire lobby froze. Then, slowly, white letters appeared across each monitor simultaneously. "Emergency executive review in progress. Do not interrupt system transfer." A sharp electronic tone echoed through the lobby speakers. One of the assistant managers rushed from the back office holding her phone with shaking hands. "Trevor," she whispered, "the board is on a live conference call right now." "What board?" he snapped. "The ownership board." Trevor stared at her. His face had lost nearly all color now. Ethan looked toward Vanessa again, finally noticing something small embossed in gold on the passport still lying partially open near the desk. Lancaster Crown Holdings. Founder Access Clearance. His breath caught softly. Across the lobby, thunder rolled again above Manhattan while the chandelier lights reflected across the polished floor like fractured glass. Vanessa slowly stood from the couch, smoothing one hand over the sleeve of her rain-damp coat. The entire lobby watched her now. Every employee. Every guest. Every manager. Trevor swallowed hard as she stepped toward the reception desk once more. Then his own phone vibrated violently inside his pocket. He pulled it out with stiff fingers and stared at the screen. Termination notice pending review. The vibration in Trevor Whitmore's hand seemed louder than the storm outside. For a second, he just stared at the Notification on his phone like his mind refused to process the words. Termination notice pending review. Beneath it sat the gold crest of Lancaster Crown Holdings. Official. Verified. Final. His throat tightened. Around him, the lobby had become unnaturally still. Even the elevators seemed quieter now, their soft mechanical hum fading beneath the heavy silence spreading across the marble floor. Vanessa stepped closer to the reception desk, calm and composed, while reflections from the chandelier shimmered across the wet fabric of her coat. Nobody stopped her anymore. Nobody dared. The receptionist who had mocked her minutes earlier slowly backed away from the computer terminal, eyes wide with panic. "Mr. Whitmore," she whispered shakily, "my access just disappeared too." Trevor looked toward the monitor. Her employee profile had been wiped completely from the system. Nearby, another manager checked his phone and suddenly went pale. One after another, notification sounds began echoing through the lobby like falling dominoes. Soft electronic chimes. Sharp vibrations. Tiny sounds carrying enormous consequences. Ethan Brooks stood frozen beside the luggage carts, watching everything unfold with stunned disbelief. He had worked at Lancaster Crown for almost 3 years, and in all that time, he had never once seen upper management afraid. Until now. Vanessa placed one hand lightly on the polished reception counter and looked directly at Trevor. "Do you know what the first Lancaster Crown hotel looked like?" Trevor swallowed hard but said nothing. "It had 26 rooms," Vanessa continued quietly. "The carpet smelled like bleach because I cleaned them myself every night after closing. The pipes froze every winter. Half the guests complained about the heat. But people came back anyway." Her voice never rose. That somehow made every word hit harder. "Do you know why?" Trevor's lips parted slightly. No answer came. Vanessa glanced around the massive lobby. Crystal chandeliers. Imported marble. Gold trim. Expensive silence. Because they felt respected when they walked through the door. A middle-aged guest near the elevators slowly lowered his phone, his expression shifting from curiosity to embarrassment. The young concierge near the side desk stared at the floor, blinking back tears. Trevor tried forcing himself back into control. "Ms. Cole, if there has been some misunderstanding, I am sure we can resolve this privately." Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. "You never asked my name." That sentence landed heavier than shouting ever could. Trevor's face tightened as the truth settled across the room. He had judged her before she ever spoke. Before he checked a reservation. Before he touched the passport still lying open on the desk beside them. He had seen her skin color, her wet coat, her quiet posture, and built an entire story around it in seconds. Another elevator opened across the lobby. 3 sharply dressed executives stepped out, moving quickly toward the front desk with security badges hanging from their jackets. Their expressions were grim. The oldest among them, a silver-haired woman named Eleanor Price, stopped the moment she saw Vanessa. "Founder Cole," she said immediately, voice respectful. "We came as soon as we received your authorization." Every employee in the lobby seemed to stop breathing at once. Trevor's shoulders visibly dropped. The receptionist covered her mouth with one trembling hand. Vanessa gave a small nod toward Eleanor. "How many complaints from guests regarding discrimination have been buried in the last 12 months?" Eleanor hesitated carefully before answering. 37 confirmed incidents under internal review. Trevor spun toward her instantly. "That is completely misleading." Eleanor did not even look at him. 7 involved this property directly. The words hit the lobby like ice water. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just tired. Deeply tired. Outside, rainwater streamed down the giant windows while taxis rolled through the glowing Manhattan streets below. Inside the lobby, the empire she built stood polished and beautiful around her, but something underneath it had rotted quietly for years. Vanessa opened her eyes again and looked toward Ethan. "You were the only one who suggested checking the reservation first." Ethan blinked, caught completely off guard. I just thought it was the right thing to do. Vanessa nodded softly. That matters more than you think. Then she turned back toward Trevor as another notification vibrated across his phone. Final executive action approved. The second notification hit Trevor's phone before he could even unlock the first one. His hands had started trembling now, small involuntary movements he tried desperately to hide by gripping the device tighter. Around the lobby, the polished image of Lancaster Crown was quietly unraveling thread by thread. Managers whispered into dead headsets. Front desk employees refreshed frozen screens that no longer recognized their credentials. Somewhere near the restaurant entrance, a server accidentally dropped a tray of champagne flutes, and the sharp crack of glass across marble made several people flinch. Vanessa did not react. She stood calmly beside the reception desk while the glow from the chandelier softened the tiredness beneath her eyes. Eleanor Price stepped closer, holding a tablet against her chest. "Founder Cole," she said carefully, "the emergency review board is fully assembled on the call." Vanessa nodded once. "Put them on the main screen." Trevor looked up instantly. "You cannot seriously do this publicly." Vanessa finally turned toward him again. "You made this public the moment you decided humiliation was acceptable customer service." Her voice remained low, but every word carried through the silent lobby with painful clarity. Eleanor tapped her tablet. Seconds later, the giant decorative display wall behind the reception desk flickered to life. The Lancaster Crown logo disappeared, replaced by a live video conference filled with board members sitting in offices across New York, Chicago, London, and Atlanta. Some looked angry. Others looked exhausted. But every face changed the moment Vanessa appeared on screen. "Good evening, Ms. Cole," several voices said almost at once. Trevor's stomach dropped. Nearby guests exchanged stunned looks while employees slowly stepped farther away from the reception desk, as though distance alone could protect them from what was happening. Vanessa clasped her hands loosely in front of her. "I arrived at this property 43 minutes ago under a private reservation made through executive channels." Eleanor handed her the tablet showing timestamps and security logs. Vanessa barely glanced at it. "Within 60 seconds of entering this lobby, I was profiled, dismissed, denied access to a paid suite, and threatened with removal despite valid credentials." Trevor immediately stepped forward. "This is not an accurate representation of what happened." Vanessa looked at him quietly. "Then tell them what happened." Trevor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The board members watched in silence. He suddenly realized how impossible the truth sounded when spoken out loud. He denied the owner of the hotel access because she looked like someone he believed did not belong there. One of the board members, an older man in silver glasses, leaned toward his camera. "Mr. Whitmore, did you verify the reservation before initiating removal procedures?" Trevor hesitated too long. That was answer enough. Vanessa glanced toward the employees gathered behind the desk. Some looked terrified. Others ashamed. A few simply looked numb. "The dangerous thing about discrimination," Vanessa said softly, "is that people rarely announce it proudly. It hides behind words like policy, standards, appearance, atmosphere. It survives because good people stay quiet while someone else gets humiliated." Ethan lowered his eyes slightly after hearing that. Vanessa noticed. "Accept him." Every head turned toward Ethan Brooks standing beside the luggage carts. His face flushed immediately. He was the only employee who suggested verifying information before making assumptions. The young receptionist who mocked Vanessa earlier suddenly began crying quietly into her hands. "I am sorry," she whispered shakily. "I did not think," Vanessa interrupted gently. "That is exactly the problem. You did not think." The lobby fell silent again. Outside, rainwater glided down the windows in silver rivers while traffic lights painted red and gold reflections across the marble floor. The beauty of the hotel suddenly felt hollow beneath the weight of what had happened there only minutes earlier. Eleanor's tablet chimed softly with a finalized report. She looked down at it once before lifting her eyes toward Vanessa. "Executive review completed," she announced carefully. Trevor straightened instinctively, as though one last fragment of authority still remained inside him. Vanessa accepted the tablet from Eleanor but did not look at it immediately. Instead, she looked around the lobby one more time. The expensive art. The velvet furniture. The polished brass. Everything she once dreamed of building. Then she spoke quietly enough that people leaned forward to hear her. "Luxury without humanity is just decoration." Finally, she lowered her eyes to the screen in her hand. Then Trevor Whitmore heard the sentence that changed his life forever. "Effective immediately, your employment with Lancaster Crown has been terminated." For several long seconds after Vanessa spoke, nobody in the lobby moved. Trevor Whitmore stood perfectly still beneath the chandelier, his face pale under the warm gold light while the words echoed through the enormous space around him. "Effective immediately, your employment with Lancaster Crown has been terminated." The sentence seemed too heavy for the room itself. Trevor blinked slowly, as though he expected the board members on the giant screen behind the desk to interrupt and tell everyone this had been some misunderstanding. But nobody spoke. Not one person defended him. The silence hurt more than anger would have. Finally, Trevor let out a slow breath and looked around the lobby he had controlled for 7 years. The front desk employees avoided his eyes. Managers who once laughed at his jokes suddenly became fascinated with their phones and tablets. Even the guests recording everything had gone quiet now. Shame had a way of draining excitement from a room. Trevor looked back toward Vanessa. "I built this property into the highest-rated luxury hotel in Manhattan," he said carefully, his voice rough around the edges. "I gave everything to this company." Vanessa studied him for a moment. "That is true." Trevor seemed startled by the answer. She had not denied his work. She had not insulted him. Somehow that made what came next even harder to hear. But somewhere along the way, Vanessa continued softly, "You started protecting the image of luxury more than the people inside it." Outside, the rain had almost stopped completely now. Water dripped steadily from the edge of the awning beyond the giant windows while yellow taxi lights slid through the wet Manhattan streets below. The city kept moving. But inside the lobby, time felt frozen. Eleanor Price stepped closer with another report in her hand. "Founder Cole," she said quietly, "corporate security has already disabled executive access for all management personnel connected to the review." A sharp breath escaped from the receptionist behind the desk. Another assistant manager suddenly realized his key card no longer worked and stared down at it in disbelief. One by one, employees connected to the complaints were quietly being removed from the system in real time. No shouting. No dramatic scene. Just access disappearing. Authority evaporating silently through software and signatures. Trevor looked down at his own phone again. His company email had already been deactivated. Calendar erased. Corporate files locked. 7 years reduced to a blank screen. Ethan Brooks watched everything from beside the luggage carts, his stomach twisting with emotions he could not fully understand. Part of him felt vindicated after seeing how Vanessa had been treated. Another part felt strangely sad. Because for the first time, he realized how quickly power could disappear when it was built on the wrong foundation. Vanessa noticed the expression on his face. "You are wondering if this is justice," she said gently. Ethan hesitated before nodding once. Vanessa glanced around the lobby again. "Justice is not revenge." Her voice softened. "Revenge wants humiliation returned. Justice wants dignity restored." Several employees lowered their heads after hearing that. The young receptionist wiped tears from her cheeks quietly. Vanessa walked toward the front desk and picked up the passport Trevor never bothered to open earlier that night. She slipped it calmly back into her purse. "Do you know why I still do anonymous inspections myself?" she asked. Softly. Nobody answered. "Because spreadsheets do not tell me how human beings are treated when nobody important is supposed to be watching." Trevor closed his eyes briefly. The truth of that settled over him heavier than termination itself. He remembered the exact moment he judged her. The wet coat. The quiet posture. The simple shoes. He had mistaken humility for inferiority. Around him, Lancaster Crown still sparkled with wealth and elegance. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. Marble floors reflected soft golden light. Expensive perfume lingered faintly in the air from passing guests. But suddenly all of it felt smaller somehow. Hollow beneath the weight of what had been exposed there tonight. Eleanor's phone vibrated softly. She checked the message and looked toward Vanessa. The international investors have officially suspended tomorrow's acquisition meeting pending cultural review of all Lancaster Crown properties. A ripple of shock spread across the room. Trevor looked up instantly. That deal had been worth billions. Vanessa said nothing for a moment. Then she looked toward the rain-streaked windows overlooking Manhattan and spoke almost to herself. One moment of prejudice can cost more than people realize. The lobby grew quieter after Eleanor announced the investors had suspended the acquisition. Not shocked quiet. Heavy quiet. The kind that settled into people slowly once they realized the damage could no longer be undone. Outside the towering glass windows, Manhattan shimmered beneath fresh rain, streets glowing gold and red under traffic lights while steam curled softly from the saw grates along Fifth Avenue. Inside Lancaster Crown, the air suddenly felt colder despite the warmth of the chandeliers above. Vanessa walked away from the reception desk without another word and stopped beside the enormous windows overlooking the city. For a long moment, she simply stood there watching rainwater slide down the glass in slow silver streams. Nobody interrupted her. Even the board members on the giant screen remained silent now. Trevor Whitmore sat down heavily on one of the velvet lobby chairs nearby, his phone resting uselessly in his hand. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically smaller. Just emptied out. The sharp confidence he carried earlier in the evening had drained away completely, leaving behind a tired man staring at the ruins of his own decisions. Ethan quietly moved one abandoned suitcase out of the center walkway before stopping again near the concierge desk. He kept glancing toward Vanessa, uncertain whether he should say something or simply stay invisible. Across the lobby, employees whispered softly among themselves. Some looked ashamed. Others frightened about what would happen next. But no one seemed angry at Vanessa anymore. That emotion had disappeared the moment they understood she never came there looking for revenge. She came looking for truth. Vanessa finally spoke without turning around. "Do you know what my mother used to tell me when I was little?" Her reflection shimmered faintly in the rain-streaked glass as the entire lobby listened. She said people reveal who they are most honestly when they think nobody important is watching. Her voice remained soft, almost swallowed by the distant sound of rain outside. That is why kindness matters. Trevor lowered his eyes slowly. Somewhere behind the bar, an employee quietly shut off the music system. The silence afterward felt enormous. Vanessa rested one hand lightly against the cool window glass. 30 years ago, my mother cleaned hotel rooms in Atlanta 12 hours a day. Several employees exchanged surprised looks. Vanessa had never spoken publicly about her childhood before. She used to bring me to work sometimes because she could not afford childcare. I would sit in laundry rooms doing homework while people walked past us like we were furniture. Her reflection trembled slightly as headlights passed outside. One afternoon, a guest spilled coffee all over the lobby floor and blamed my mother even though she had nothing to do with it. The manager humiliated her in front of everyone. Vanessa paused. The memory still lived somewhere deep in her voice. I remember standing there thinking that if I ever built something successful one day, nobody would be treated like they were invisible. Trevor pressed one hand against his forehead slowly. Shame spread across his face in silence because he suddenly understood something terrible. Vanessa had not just been inspecting a hotel tonight. She had been protecting a promise she made as a little girl standing beside her exhausted mother decades earlier. Eleanor quietly muted the boardroom microphones one by one until only the lobby remained. Nobody wanted to interrupt this moment. Vanessa finally turned back toward the room. Her eyes looked tired now. Not angry. Just disappointed in a way that felt deeper than punishment. The saddest part, she said softly, is that luxury hotels spend millions teaching employees how to fold napkins, pour wine, greet celebrities, and memorize guest preferences. She looked toward Trevor briefly. But somehow we still fail to teach people how to recognize dignity. The receptionist who mocked her earlier began crying again, quieter this time. Not out of fear anymore. Out of understanding. Ethan swallowed hard as he listened. He thought about every guest he had ever carried luggage for. The wealthy ones who never looked at him. The tired families. The elderly couples. The people who smiled kindly. The people who acted like workers did not exist. Suddenly the entire hotel felt different to him. Like he was finally seeing the invisible structure underneath it all. Vanessa glanced once more toward the rain beyond the windows. Money can build beautiful buildings, she said quietly. But character is what makes people feel safe inside them. Then she looked back toward Trevor Whitmore, whose eyes remained fixed on the marble floor beneath him. And tonight, she said softly, this building failed that test. For a while, nobody spoke after Vanessa's final words. The rain outside had stopped completely now, but the windows still carried long silver trails of water beneath the Manhattan lights. Inside the lobby, the silence no longer felt tense. It felt exposed. Like the building itself had been forced to look into a mirror for the first time in years. Trevor Whitmore remained seated beneath the chandelier, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly together as though holding himself in place. The giant screen behind the reception desk still displayed the board members watching quietly from different cities around the world, but even they seemed smaller now compared to the weight hanging in the room. Vanessa slowly walked back toward the front desk, her heels making soft sounds against the marble floor. Nobody moved out of obligation anymore. They moved instinctively. Respect had entered the room where fear used to stand. Ethan noticed it immediately. The same employees who ignored Vanessa earlier now watched her with something closer to humility. Vanessa stopped beside the reception counter and looked down at the old brass edge running along the marble. Her fingertips brushed lightly against it. This was the first thing I approved during the renovation, she said quietly. Eleanor glanced at the counter with surprise. You still remember? Vanessa gave a faint smile without looking up. I remember everything. Trevor lifted his eyes slowly toward her. For the first time all night, the defensiveness inside him had disappeared completely. What remained looked painfully human. I did not think I was racist, he admitted quietly. The confession landed softly in the empty air. Nobody interrupted him. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment before answering. Most people who discriminate do not think they are. Trevor swallowed hard. I thought I was protecting standards. Vanessa nodded slightly. That is what makes it dangerous. Somewhere near the elevators, a guest quietly turned off the recording on his phone. The moment no longer felt like entertainment. It felt personal now. Trevor rubbed both hands slowly across his face. When you walked through those doors tonight, all I saw was someone who did not fit the image this hotel sells. His voice cracked slightly around the edges. I never stopped to ask who you actually were. Vanessa's expression softened, but only slightly. That happens to people like me every day. The receptionist behind the desk wiped her eyes again, ashamed. Ethan stared down at the luggage tag still hanging from one of the suitcases beside him. The entire lobby seemed to breathe differently after hearing Trevor finally say the truth out loud. Not excuses. Not corporate language. Truth. Vanessa glanced toward the giant boardroom screen. Do you know what the investors told me last month? Several board members shifted slightly in their seats. They said Lancaster Crown had become one of the most beautiful hospitality brands in the world. She looked around the glittering lobby again. But beauty without humanity becomes cold after a while. Trevor closed his eyes briefly. Every polished detail around him suddenly felt meaningless compared to the damage caused in only a few minutes tonight. Eleanor stepped closer to Vanessa quietly. Founder Cole, legal is asking whether you want immediate public statements prepared before the story reaches social media. Vanessa thought for a moment while the chandelier light reflected softly across the marble floor. Then she shook her head. No, several board members looked surprised. Eleanor blinked once. No public statement. Vanessa turned toward Trevor again. Humiliation does not teach people a lesson they think it does. Trevor looked genuinely confused now. Vanessa continued softly, the internet would destroy him by morning. Millions of strangers would enjoy watching him fall apart. Her eye shifted briefly toward the phone still held by guests nearby. But cruelty does not become justice simply because the target changes. The word settled heavily across the lobby. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest hearing that. After everything Trevor had done tonight, Vanessa still refused to publicly destroy him. That was the moment the room truly changed. Not when the terminations happened. Not when the investors suspended the deal. Now. Because everyone suddenly understood the difference between power and character. Trevor lowered his head slowly, overwhelmed by a kindness he did not deserve. Vanessa looked toward Eleanor calmly. Handle this internally. Quietly. Focus on rebuilding the culture. Then she glanced once more toward Trevor Whitmore, whose entire world had collapsed beneath the same chandelier where he once judged her. People can lose jobs, she said softly. What matters is whether they lose the chance to become better. Afterward. The atmosphere inside Lancaster Crown changed after Vanessa refused to publicly humiliate Trevor. The tension that had gripped the lobby all night slowly loosened, replaced by something quieter and far more uncomfortable. Reflection. Employees who had spent years moving through the hotel with rehearsed smiles and polished greetings now stood silently beneath the chandeliers confronting the truth about the culture they helped create. Vanessa walked slowly toward the center of the lobby, her footsteps soft against the marble floor while the city lights shimmered through the rain-streaked windows behind her. The board members on the giant screen remained connected, listening carefully. Nobody wanted to interrupt her now. Eleanor Price glanced down at the tablet in her hands. Founder Cole, she said gently, the investors are requesting a statement before deciding whether tomorrow's acquisition meeting can be salvaged. Vanessa stopped near the center fountain where water flowed quietly over dark stone beneath warm gold lighting. For several seconds, she simply watched the ripples moving across the surface. Then she spoke without turning around. Tell them Lancaster Crown is not for sale tonight. Several board members exchanged surprised looks immediately. Eleanor blinked. You are suspending the acquisition. Vanessa nodded once. A company that cannot recognize human dignity is not ready to expand its power. Trevor looked up slowly from his chair after hearing that. Billions of dollars had just disappeared from the table because of what happened in this lobby. Yet Vanessa's voice carried no bitterness at all. Only conviction. Ethan stepped closer carefully, still uncertain whether he even belonged in this conversation anymore. Ms. Cole, he said quietly, can I ask you something? Vanessa turned toward him. Of course. Ethan hesitated before speaking. Why did you stay? The question settled softly into the room. Vanessa understood what he meant immediately. Why stay after the humiliation? Why sit calmly beneath the chandelier instead of walking away angry? Vanessa gave a faint smile touched with sadness. Because if I walked away, she said. Softly, nothing would change. The fountain water continued flowing quietly behind her while every employee listened. People would continue being judged by appearance. Workers would continue watching discrimination happen in silence because they are afraid to speak. Her eyes moved briefly toward the reception desk. And another woman walking through these doors next month would experience the exact same thing. The young receptionist lowered her head again, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. Vanessa walked toward her slowly. The woman looked terrified as Vanessa approached, expecting anger, maybe even another punishment. Instead, Vanessa stopped beside her and spoke gently. "What is your name?" The receptionist blinked in surprise. "Claire." Vanessa nodded. "Claire, do not spend the rest of your life pretending this moment never happened." Claire's lips trembled. "I am so sorry." Vanessa's voice softened even more. Good people become dangerous when they stop examining themselves. Claire quietly covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Trevor watched the exchange with disbelief growing slowly inside him. Vanessa had every reason to destroy these people publicly. Instead, she kept offering them something much harder to live with. Grace. Eleanor's tablet chimed again. She glanced down before speaking carefully. "The investors are asking one final question before they leave the call." Vanessa looked toward the giant screen. One of the international board representatives leaned forward slightly. "Founder Cole," he said, "after everything that happened tonight, why continue fighting for this company at all?" Vanessa stood silent for a moment while the chandelier light reflected softly across the marble around her. Then she answered quietly. "Because I remember what it felt like to be invisible." Nobody moved. Nobody even looked away. "And because somewhere out there tonight," she continued softly, "there is a little girl sitting in a laundry room beside her exhausted mother believing the world has already decided what she is worth." Trevor lowered his eyes again. Ethan swallowed hard. Even Eleanor looked emotional hearing those words. Vanessa glanced around the massive lobby one final time. The polished stone. The expensive art. The employees standing silently beneath the chandeliers. "If Lancaster Crown is going to survive," she said quietly, "then every person who walks through these doors must feel seen before they feel impressed." Outside, the clouds finally began to part above Manhattan, and for the first time all night, pale moonlight touched the glass windows of the hotel. The lobby remained silent long after Vanessa finished speaking. Beyond the towering windows of Lancaster Crown, Manhattan glowed beneath clearing skies while rainwater shimmered across the streets like liquid gold. Inside, the chandeliers still sparkled with the same expensive brilliance they had carried all evening, but something about the hotel felt different now. Softer somehow. Human. Vanessa stood near the fountain quietly while employees, guests, and executives absorbed the weight of everything that had unfolded in less than an hour. Nobody seemed eager to leave. It no longer felt like a scandal. It felt like a reckoning. Eleanor Price slowly closed the tablet in her hands. "The investors have disconnected from the call," she said gently. Vanessa nodded once. The giant screen behind the reception desk faded back to the Lancaster Crown logo, glowing softly above the marble lobby. Trevor Whitmore finally stood from his chair after several long minutes. He looked exhausted now, stripped of the authority he once carried so effortlessly. But there was something else in his face too. Honesty. The kind that only appears after pride collapses completely. He walked slowly toward Vanessa, stopping several feet away. "I spent years believing leadership meant protecting appearances," he admitted quietly. "Tonight I realized I stopped seeing people altogether." Vanessa studied him calmly but said nothing. Trevor glanced around the lobby once more. Employees avoided his eyes less now. Not because they respected him again, but because they no longer feared him. "I do not expect forgiveness," he said softly. "But I am sorry." The word settled gently into the room. No excuses attached. No defense. Just truth. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment, before finally answering. "The hardest thing for people to admit is not that they made a mistake." Her voice remained calm beneath the warm chandelier light. "It is admitting the mistake came from something already living inside them." Trevor lowered his head slightly. Across the lobby, Claire quietly removed her employee name badge and stared down at it in her hands like she was seeing it differently now. Ethan stood beside the luggage carts watching all of it unfold with a feeling he would remember for the rest of his life. He realized leadership was not loud. It was not fear. It was not power displayed through humiliation. It was composure under pressure. Mercy when revenge would have been easier. Vanessa finally stepped toward the front entrance of the hotel. The marble floor reflected softly beneath her heels while the doorman instinctively opened the giant glass doors without being asked. Cool night air drifted gently into the lobby, carrying the distant sound of traffic and rainwater still dripping from awnings outside. Before leaving, Vanessa stopped beside Ethan. "How old are you?" she asked softly. 24, Ethan answered quickly. Vanessa nodded once. "You reminded me tonight that courage does not always arrive loudly." Ethan looked stunned. "I did not really do anything." Vanessa gave the faintest smile. "You spoke when silence would have been easier." Her words stayed with him long after. Claire suddenly stepped forward from behind the reception desk, eyes still red from crying. "Ms. Cole." Vanessa turned gently toward her. Claire swallowed hard before speaking. "Thank you for not destroying us publicly." The lobby grew quiet again. Vanessa glanced once around the hotel one final time. The brass rails. The polished marble. The enormous chandeliers reflecting gold against the glass. "People learn more from grace than humiliation," she said softly. Then she stepped outside into the cool Manhattan night. The storm had passed completely now. Moonlight shimmered faintly across the wet streets while taxis rolled through the city below glowing skyscrapers. Ethan hurried after her, carrying the small black suitcase she arrived with earlier. He stopped beside her near the curb beneath the silver hotel lights. "Ms. Cole," he asked carefully. Vanessa looked at him. Ethan hesitated before speaking. "Do you think the hotel can really change after tonight?" Vanessa looked back through the giant glass windows at the employees still standing quietly inside the lobby. Trevor remained near the reception desk staring down at the marble floor in silence. Claire was helping an elderly couple check in personally, speaking more gently than before. Small things. Human things. Vanessa smiled softly at the sight. "Change always starts quietly," she said. Then she took her suitcase from Ethan's hand and disappeared into the glowing Manhattan night, while behind her the lights of Lancaster Crown reflected across the rain-soaked pavement like a building learning how to see people again.